Alright, everyone. I told you a couple days ago that I was going to start some schedule previews here on the schedule. Here on the channel. And here we go. The first one we're going to start with is the defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. Now, Michigan, impressive season last year. A lot of people questioned that they had the ability to get it done in the big stage, and they did. Not without adversity, however. You had the early scandal with Harbaugh, with the hamburger situation, and then you had the whole Connor Stallions Spygate-ish situation. But despite all that, they managed to get through and go undefeated to win the championship. But that doesn't mean Michigan's in a good position this year, however. First off, they lose Coach Harbaugh to the NFL. They put in a new coach. That coach did coach a few games, but it's important to note that Harbaugh was basically managing all operations. The guy was just basically a stand-in for him on game days. So he really, even though he technically has a 6-0 record as a coach, you might as well have avoided those wins to Harbaugh because it was his players. He had control of the team except on game day. He was just a game day stand-in. But he takes over the team. He hasn't really had head coaching experience before unless you do count the interim games. They're also losing a lot of talent both through the transfer portal and through the draft. Obviously, they lost J.J. McCarthy. They lose Blake Corum. They lose quite a few players in the transfer portal. So there is some questions this year about Michigan when it comes to can they remain a good force in the college football world now that you lose a lot of your main guys and you lose Coach Jim Harbaugh. Now, in terms of their schedule, let's start looking at that right now. First off, you have the Fresno State Bulldogs. That's an immediate win. Fresno State, they're decent, but actually, I don't really know much about Fresno State. But the reason why you don't hear about them is because they're not a major powerhouse. They're not going to beat Michigan. Give that a win for Michigan. Also, an interesting quirk here is that Michigan is going to have their first 5 games at home in Michigan. So that's definitely an advantage, especially with the new coaching system and really a new system in general, that Michigan's going to open with 5 consecutive home games. The second of them, though, is not nearly as easy. You got the Texas Longhorns. Texas, out of the teams that made the playoffs last year, which were Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama, Texas is in the best position of them all. They retain a lot of their starters. They retain head coach Steve Sarkisian. Mainly, they're really in a good position. Most circuits predict Georgia to win the national title, but those same people will have Texas as a very close second. I think Texas is going to beat Michigan this year. Look, maybe if this were later in the season, I could have seen Michigan pulling away from Texas, but Texas, there's too much certainty with Texas, and there's too much uncertainty with Michigan to predict a victory for Michigan in the game against Texas. So that's why I have Texas getting the win over Michigan. The good news is you get Arkansas State next. Really don't even have to spend a lot of time on that one. This is a win for Michigan. Then you start the conference play. You get your 3 non-cons out the way before going into conference schedule, starting with Big Ten newcomer, the USC Trojans. They are coached once again by Lincoln Riley. USC may have been the most disappointing team of them all in 2023. They were this close. Let me put my finger where you can see it on camera. They were this close to the college football playoff in 2022, needing only to beat Washington in the Pac-12 title game to get there. But then last year, they lose 5 regular season games. I want to say they lost 4 out of their last 5 games. Don't quote me on it, though. Really disappointing season last year. Now, Lincoln Riley does make some pretty significant changes. He did fire Alex Grinch. late towards the season last year, and he's putting a new defensive coordinator. But other than that, I really don't see a reason to give USC the victory over Michigan. And then not to mention USC is losing Heisman winner Caleb Williams, or former Heisman winner. He didn't win it last year. But they do lose a former Heisman winner and the former Caleb Williams. Now that the guy that's taking over for him did win them the bowl game last year. But that was against a more inferior opponent, against a beast like Michigan. I think Michigan's going to get the win. Then the last of your 5 home games to start off the season is the Washington Huskies. Now, I mentioned how Texas is the opponent, or I should say the team from last year who made the college football playoffs. Texas is in the best position. Washington, on the other hand, is in the worst position. They lost a whole bunch of key players, including Michael Penix, who contended for the Heisman last year. They lose a lot of players to the transfer portal, and then they lose head coach Kalen DeBoer. He left when Saban retired to take over at Alabama. Not really a good situation going on in Washington. A lot of people aren't really expecting a lot of Washington this year. I think Michigan's going to beat them. I think because Washington's another newcomer to the Big Ten. They're in for a rude awakening in the Big Ten, especially given the situation we see Washington in. It's kind of unfortunate. I don't really think anybody really had a beef with Washington unless you're a Washington State fan. But they are just not in a good position this year with the loss of Kalen DeBoer, having lost a lot of great players to the transfer portal, and then you lose your quarterback, Michael Penix, to the NFL. Win for Michigan in that situation. Then you get your first of 2 bye weeks. Yes, I said first of 2. There's a weird quirk in the calendar this year when it comes to college football. College football regular season always starts, well, now we have week 0, so it starts a week earlier, but most teams they start the regular season on Labor Day Saturday, and then they end their regular season the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Normally that's 13 Saturdays in that time frame, which allows for 12 regular season games and 1 bye week. But this year, that same span actually has 14 Saturdays. And so, with that, in the 12-game regular season, each team actually has 2 bye weeks. So that's why every team is going to have 2 bye weeks. I will reiterate it in the rest of the videos. But Michigan, you get your first bye week after your game against Washington. Then you again go back on the road to play Illinois. Illinois, we shouldn't really hear a lot about this year. They were in the Big Ten West up till last year, but now Big Ten's doing away with divisions, just like feels like every other conference is. So we're probably not going to hear from a lot of the Big Ten West teams, at least not this year, while they build back up to try and compete with the big boys. Michigan easily get the win over Illinois. Then you have your in-state rival, the Michigan State Spartans. Michigan State's another one of these teams in the Big Ten that hasn't really made a lot of noise over the past couple years. And with the expansion of the Big Ten, we shouldn't really hear a lot of them this year. I think Michigan's going to beat their in-state rivals again. Then you get probably one of your 2 toughest conference games, starting with number 3 Oregon, or who's currently ranked number 3, Oregon. Oregon nearly finished with a Pac-12 title last year, but they fell apart when they really shouldn't have against Washington. They do lose quarterback Bo Nix, but a lot of other pieces are retained. I think Michigan's going to lose the game against Oregon. Look, for years and years and years, we said the 2 big boys of the Big Ten are Michigan and Ohio State. Those days are gone now. Oregon's coming in there. They should be a contender. USC under Lincoln Riley is probably going to be a contender within the next couple years. Washington, once they're able to rebuild, should be a contender. The days of Michigan and Ohio State basically carving up the conference for their own, done. And I think Oregon proves it this year. I think they get the win over Michigan in the regular season. Good news is next week you play Indiana. Should be a big win. Indiana may be one of the worst teams in the entire Big Ten this year. Then you get your second bye week right before you play Northwestern. Northwestern kind of shocked the world last year. We all thought they were going to have a 1-win or even 0-win season last year after Pat Fitzgerald got fired with the whole hazing / sexual harassment scandal. But they managed to ink out 7 wins. However, again, with the expansion of the Big Ten and the Big Ten being more daunting this year, I don't expect to hear a lot from Northwestern this year. I think Michigan's going to be able to win this one. And then you get your biggest rival, possibly the biggest rivalry in college football, period. In fact, let me scratch that. It's not possibly the biggest rivalry in college football. It is the biggest rivalry in college football. You know who I'm talking about, Ohio State, Michigan. Look at all the big moments in here. Michigan, you had a series with Tom Brady. You had a lot of classic games throughout the stretch. Michigan has seemingly turned the tide in this one. They had a period in 20 years where they only won 1 game against Ohio State, but now they've won the last 3. But like Oregon and like Texas, I think Ohio State. Now, Ohio State did lose Kyle McCord from last year. They're putting in a new quarterback, but Ohio State in the regime of Urban Meyer and then transferring to Ryan Day, they can build anybody into a good quarterback because they just have a good system. You know, they turned J.T. Barrett into a multi-time Big Ten winner. They elevated Dwayne Haskins to near Heisman status. They took Justin Fields, who was a backup at Georgia. They make the playoffs twice with him as the starting quarterback. C.J. Stroud would have won a Heisman had it not been for Bryce Young and Caleb Williams. And then Kyle McCord, even though he wasn't nearly as good as those, he still inked out an 11-1 season under them, which in any other season might have been enough to make the playoffs, but there was just too much between Georgia, Florida State, Alabama, Texas, Washington, and Michigan. Ohio State is an offensive factory. Now, you can question. I have a lot of gripes against Ryan Day, none of which have to do with his on-field coaching. It's more of his press conferences and the way he presents the team. But I think Ohio State is going to snap the 3-game losing streak they have against Michigan and beat Michigan. So there you go. My prediction for Michigan's regular season, 9-3, losing to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. Michigan, I don't expect them to fall off a cliff, especially since their interim coach, or their new coach, I keep forgetting his name for some reason, but he did win 6 games last year, even amid turmoil. So I do think he can build the team back, but Michigan's just lost too many pieces for me to consider them as a possible Big Ten champion. 9-3 record, possible but unlikely. You're going to see as these predictions go on that I have 4 SEC teams finishing with 10 wins. So, and at that point, you'd possibly even leave out one of those 4 SEC teams and have 10 wins if they do. So if you're going to leave out a possible 10-win SEC team, I wouldn't have high hopes if Michigan would end up with a 9-3 season to make the playoffs. Now they could. Maybe the SEC only has 2 or 3 10-win teams, maybe the ACC and the Big 12 don't really have a lot of 10-win teams. So in that case, I could maybe see a 9-3 Michigan get in. But for sure, the conference champions and the main group of 5 champion all get in. So that's 5 seeds right there. The Big 10 runner-up you can probably see getting in. The SEC runner-up you can see getting in. Maybe 2 of each that I just said. So that gives you there. You have 10 seeds out of the 9 seeds out of the 10 seeds already there. So that leaves you only 3 other seeds to fill. If the Big 12 runner-up did well, so you could probably put them there. If the ACC runner-up did well, you can put them there. So where do you go from there? Do you put a third SEC team? If there's 3 10-win SEC teams, maybe. Or what about another 10-win Big 10 team? Penn State, maybe. I don't know. Or if Notre Dame goes 11-1, do you put them there? So many unanswered questions that we're going to have to see answered as this 12-team playoff comes in. But overall, if Michigan goes 9-3 like I'm predicting them to do, and many other outlets are predicting them to do, I would not have my hopes up if I'm a Michigan fan of them making the playoffs. But anyway, that's my Michigan prediction. I'm going in order first with the 4 playoff teams from last year. So that the next team I'm going to do probably sometime next week is going to be the Washington Huskies. Thank you. Have a good day. And bye-bye.